I'm Rob Danzman, and this is The Better Semester, where I provide insight and actionable advice to parents of college students. I'm a nationally certified counselor and licensed clinical mental health counselor, specializing in work with college students and their parents to improve mental health, organization, and motivation. All right. Josh, thanks so much for being here with me today. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, let's get started. I would love to hear a little bit about your background and experience and what actually got you to the place you are today. And maybe you could describe the place you are to where you are at today.
Sure. Well, I'm the founder and executive director of Red Mountain Sedona, which is a transitional program for young adults in Sedona, Arizona, who have, for whatever reason, failed to meet their goals. So there's a lot of reasons that might happen. It might be trauma, anxiety, depression, issues with substances, other compulsive behavior, neurodivergence. All of the students at Red Mountain have one of those issues. Some of them have several of those issues, but the common denominator is they're not where they want to be in life. The way that I found myself here, I would say, so my senior year in college, I was having an existential dilemma because a lot of people, their senior year in college, are trying to figure out what they want to do next. And I felt like my available options were to go to graduate school to become a therapist or go become a Zen monk and live at a monastery. And I was very, very interested in Zen. My road to Zen was through the martial arts, and my martial arts instructor becoming connected with a Zen monastery in New York, and he took me there when I was 19, and I just fell in love with it immediately. I was primed because my dad was also interested in Zen. And we used to watch a lot of the TV show Kung Fu with David Carradine when I was a kid. And I read a lot about Zen and I just thought it was super cool. But I thought it was something that happened in Japan and not in the United States. So I found out that that wasn't true because here is an American Zen monastery full of American Zen practitioners with an American Zen teacher whose teacher had been Japanese, but he was American. And so I now recognize in retrospect that it was because of my own trauma and my tendency to get dysregulated, as well as the fact that I have really severe ADHD. So my mind is always really active. That Zazen, the practice of Zen meditation, as I experienced during those 4 days in a really deep way, really was a panacea for a lot of those overactive nervous system issues that I had. And I didn't know anything about trauma at that time, and I didn't know that I had ADHD either. And so it just was a coping mechanism that I didn't know I needed. But once I had it, I was really passionate about it. And so by the time I was 21 and about to graduate college, I was really attracted to going and living at that monastery and really going all the way with that. But I also had felt a strong pull to be a therapist for most of my life since I'd been in high school, partly because therapy had helped me a lot, and partly because I seemed to be someone that my friends talked to a lot about their issues. And I just naturally had a lot of empathy and was able to enter into the psychic space of someone else and feel what they were feeling, which, we would call that empathy, of course, but I didn't have a word for it at the time. So I had this, lightning bolt moment where I was in the library of Guilford College and I was reading Tricycle magazine, and there was an ad for Naropa University master's degree in contemplative psychotherapy. And I got online, these are the primitive days of the internet. I got online and looked it up, and it basically it was exactly what I wanted. It was training in how to be a psychotherapist while doing a deep dive into mindfulness. And so I moved to Boulder and enrolled at Naropa and started studying Zen with the Zen teacher who was in Boulder, who was in the same lineage as the other teacher that I had been exposed to. And I found my, I figured out at a certain point in time that really what I wanted was to have a community where people could learn mindfulness while getting therapy and not have to seek it out and integrate the two on their own, but just have it very accessible. And I met my wife in graduate school, who's our co-founder, Maureen, who is currently afflicted with COVID, which is why she's not part of this interview. But she is very, very much the other founder and the other creative energy behind this program. And we were friends in graduate school, but not romantically involved. And once we got together, it moved very quickly. And I remember on our third date at the Taj Indian restaurant in Boulder, I said to her, because we had both recently gotten our master's degrees, I said, "So what do you want to do?" And she said, "I want to have a mindfulness-based healing community for young women." And I said, "Well, that's interesting because I want to have a mindfulness-based healing community for young men." And we spent the next however many 15 years learning how to do it by studying with our teachers and eventually both becoming empowered as mindfulness teachers, by working in other programs and getting a sense of what works and what doesn't work, because we were very green when we first had that vision and we knew it, so we wanted to take time to learn how to do it right. And then in 2014 we had the opportunity to start Red Mountain, and we started out with one student, and he lived in our one apartment, and we drove him around in our one van. And when we weren't with him, he was with our one other employee, other than the two of us. And over 10 years, it has grown into what it is now. We've had 600 students come through, and we usually have about 30 at a time. And we have, instead of an apartment, we have several apartment buildings, and it's all right next to our office where I'm speaking to you from. And so it's very integrated and very easy for the students to be here and to get the help they need through psychotherapy, but also have case management, have executive functioning, have all of the gaps in their ability to really thrive and adult well are filled in. Most of them work. A lot of them go to school. We can do everything here from finish high school to be in grad school, to getting into college, to getting into grad school, whatever. So it's very comprehensive, and we also have mindfulness at the core of our program. And while there's a lot of really excellent young adult transitional programs, we are the only one that has mindfulness at its core. So you might be adding on mindfulness in other environments, but it's at our core, where I'm a Zen teacher and we have another Zen teacher that works here. Maureen is a teacher in the Tibetan tradition. We have another teacher in that tradition as well. So between the four of us, it's pretty unlikely that any given student is not going to connect with at least one of us and feel comfortable. Mindfulness is a really powerful tool, and it's also very similar to psychotherapy in that if you're working with someone who has been in therapy and has read some books, they might be able to help you. Probably you're going to get more help from someone who went to graduate school and has done an internship and has a clinical supervisor and has been doing it for a long time and has seen similar issues to your issues before, and they can help you navigate it. So I hear a lot, "Oh, I'm not good at meditating," from new students. And I can almost predict what's going to happen. So then I say, "Well, tell me about the teachers you've worked with before." And they'll go, "I've never had a teacher. I just suck at meditating." And you go, "Well, if you've never been taught how to ski, you're going to not be very good at skiing."
Right.
So let's teach you how to do it. And so they do get regular meditation instruction here, both in a group and individual setting. And that is really the rocket fuel that helps them get to a different place, because mindfulness if you do it right, and if you do it consistently, and if you have a good teacher guiding you, it allows you to have choice. It allows you to take control of your life, because we can't control what happens to us and we can't control our internal responses. Some of us are hotheads. I'm a hothead. We feel things very strongly and we internally react. But mindfulness gives us the choice whether we're going to react externally or if we're going to respond. So responding is a choice, reacting is not a choice. So the really exciting thing about what we do is that in addition to all of the important work around the psychotherapy and the case management and just the day-to-day tasks, is when a student says, and this happens frequently here, when a student says something like, I was about to hang up on my mom, or I was about to start screaming at my mom, but instead I said, Mom, I'm not in a really good place to continue this conversation. Can I call you tomorrow? And she said, okay. And I said, I love you. And she said, I love you. And then we hung up. Or
Success.
success. I was on my way down the stairs to go get alcohol, and I realized what's going to happen if I do that. And so instead I went back and talked to my roommate about what was bothering me. That is where it's at. That's what makes Red Mountain so powerful. That's what makes what we do powerful. And that's frankly why I'm alive and why I have a good life, is because of learning how to live and how to work with my mind. So our mission and our passion is to help other people learn, here's how my mind works. That's the mind and mindfulness. Here's how my mind works. And here's how I can more effectively live so that I'll reach my goals.
How do the parents respond? Because I can imagine that some parents, I just want to get rid of my kid. He's a pain in the butt, or he's on academic probation, second semester, freshman year, and we just need to do something.
Mhm.
And so they're not really focused on the mindfulness piece. And then they hear about this mindfulness garbage. Like, what is this? I just want my kid to take care of him, send him back so that he's not such a pain. How do you
Yeah,
respond to parents either kind of explaining mindfulness from an effectiveness perspective? Is it convincing them that it works? Is it saying we got this, just have faith in the process? How do you handle that parental skepticism?
that's a great question. It reminds me of something one of my teachers used to say, which is you can't argue with a fence post. Um,
Yes, you can. You just won't get a response.
That's right. It won't be very satisfying. But one of the things that I feel strongly as a teacher is that you have to meet someone where they are. So if someone is skeptical, trying to argue them out of the skepticism rarely works, because then they just dig in more because the ego gets reactive when you want to defend your position. So generally, my response would be along the lines of, well, this is the reason we started Red Mountain was because it was very effective for us. Over the course of 10 years and 600 students, we have found that it's effective for most people who are struggling with the things your students struggling with. Of course, we have some students that are really into mindfulness, excuse me, before they get here. We have students that become really interested in it while they're here. And then we have the students who reluctantly do it, but they admit that it is helping them. And if we have time, I can tell you a story about that. But with the families, it's a lot of joining, and it's just being, I know you're scared. I know you're worried that your son or daughter isn't going to make it. I know that you're worried that you're wasting time and money. Send them to Sedona to meditate on the rocks. Obviously, if that's the end of the story, it is a little woo-woo. But when you put in also how many decades of clinical experience that this staff has, and you put in a Harvard educated psychiatrist, and you put in just the overwhelming data that shows that mindfulness does help decrease recidivism into any non-working behavior, I mean, I think the results speak for themselves, and sometimes I'll just say, well, let's see how it goes. And I hope that I have the opportunity to prove you wrong.
There's such a tug of war between clinicians want a certain outcome for clients. Parents definitely want an outcome. They're stakeholders, they have skin in the game. Maybe even our clients want an outcome. Often it seems like what we're trying to get them to focus on, though, is the process,
Mhm.
not the outcome. And it seems like that you're trying to get them to ignore the outcome as much as possible and have faith in the process.
Totally. Well, and one of the things about joining too is that I will often say to new students and new families who are questioning it is, well, you shouldn't trust us yet because we haven't
Mm,
earned trust. Trust is earned, it's not demanded. And ironically, of course, that's a very trust building statement because you're validating their experience. But yes, it's very important to focus on the process. And one of the things that we try to help the students and the families understand is the Red Mountain journey is only part of your life journey. So from the time the student gets here, literally, and we've enrolled 2 students in the last 2 days. So they're brand new to us, they're brand new to me, we're brand new to them. We are thinking the minute we meet someone about their life after Red Mountain. So we are focused on the outcome to some extent. We want them to be happy, healthy, productive adults. But we're also aware that they're only going to be here for a short time. Even if it might feel like a long time to them, they're only here for a short time. And so the main thing that we try to tell families is the things that come up while your student is at Red Mountain have come up before and they're going to come up again. So it's really not about fixing them or trying to change them or pacifying them. It's about helping them to appreciate themselves more, help them to understand that all their non-working behavior started as a protective behavior that helped keep them alive. You can't take away someone's crutches and expect them to walk on broken legs. So if you're going to do this work, you better heal the legs and give them a better crutch in the meantime. And it's really about helping them to when, not if, the triggers come up, the issues come up, having it be less of a problem for less time. So, I mean, I'm a fully grown person and a Zen Roshi, and I have a master's degree, and you'd think that I'd be above it all, but I'm not. I mean, I was just joking around with my wife via text earlier about something that's going on. And I texted her, it's a perfect trigger for me for these reasons. And I kind of made a joke about it. But that's the point is to be able to kind of go, oh, there it is. There's the thing that wants to pull me into the behavior that doesn't work. And I can laugh at it and I can think, oh, that's a perfect setup. And I can choose to not fall for it. So if it's really a matter of not transcending human suffering and not transcending all the muck and mire of being human. It's about learning how to do it more gracefully, more skillfully, more lovingly, more kind to yourself, more kind to those around you. Because if there's one common, I mean, one of the things we always say is if you've met one Red Mountain student, you've met one Red Mountain student because they're all different and unique. But there are certain trends, and one of the trends is that they tend to be very sensitive. And
mm,
they don't always present as super sensitive, but once you get under the hood, they're very sensitive and they're easily overwhelmed. So a lot of it is learning how to work with that and learning how to work with, I'm really bothered by that. Can I articulate it and can I move past it or can I get into some positive action rather than just shutting down and going, well, I suck, or that person is terrible, or this situation's unworkable. One of our core values here is confidence. So having the confidence that I don't feel like I can handle this, but I'm going to behave as if I can, assume I can, get the tools I need so that I can. And I, my experience is that even the most skeptical family, once they start seeing their student behave differently and handle stress differently, all the skepticism goes away because they might not know how we did it, but it's obvious that the student's resilience is higher and that they're happier and that they're not responding to those stressful stimuli in the same way. So the proof's in the pudding. I don't need to prove anything to you. It's just give me some time and then you'll see the change. And then they see the change and then they forget that they were skeptical.
Right. What, how do you all handle situations where client shows up, like these two young men, presumably that showed up the last 2 days? Um, what happens when they're making progress, they're gaining skills, they're modifying coping mechanisms, they're doing the work, they're doing the work, and no one at home is doing work. And so the environment they come from is not leveling up in terms of skills and knowledge, um and we send that kid back. How do you navigate that? Because you
Yeah.
don't have a family program, a family residential program. Maybe that's coming in the future. I don't know. But how do you yeah, how do you navigate that?
Yeah. That's a very rich question. So one male, one non-binary student have enrolled in the last 2 days. We are on all gender programs. So we have males, females, and non-binary students here. Um, it's interesting that you should ask this question now because we're actually in the middle of a parent workshop.
Mm,
And just yesterday, I went over to introduce, we always have the team introduce themselves at the beginning of the workshop and just welcome the families. And I said to them, and this is true, I said, we have seen a direct correlation over the years between the parents doing their own work and the students succeeding. So, really encouraging parents, whether your own work is your own psychotherapy, couples therapy with your spouse, family work, CODA, Al Anon, whatever it is, your own spiritual journey, because something I'm very interested in as a Zen teacher is impermanence. It's one of the 3 marks of existence that the Buddha put out there as just very fundamental to life as a human. One of the challenges as a parent, I'm the parent of a young adult, and one of the challenges is where do you give space and where do you give support? And it's a setup because you can't, it's really impossible to parent a young adult because you don't know. They're changing so much day to day. You're hardwired to protect them from all threats because once you had to. But if you keep doing that, they're never going to develop any grit. And so it's very difficult. So again, where we try to come from at Red Mountain, the Red Mountain approach is to join and be very empathetic and and inquire, are you doing your own work? Why do you not want to do your own work? If the person is adamant that they will not do it, for example, if they have narcissistic personality disorder and they're just hardwired to believe that they are not the problem and they don't need to do the work, then it becomes a very subtle, very nuanced conversation with the student where you don't want to throw the family under the bus because you don't want to turn anyone against anybody. And you also, the family is your fiduciary. So they're your client too. They're your customer, but helping the student to understand how to navigate life with a parent that's not doing their own work. So it's about just joining with whatever's happening. Sometimes you can convince a parent to do their own work. Sometimes you can't. And it's also a matter of really finding something positive to focus on. So a parent who's ranting and raving about this or that, we all have parents who are perpetually unhappy. Anyone who's running a program or works with families, well, he got a job, but not the right job. Oh, he had a girlfriend, but not the girlfriend I would have chosen for him. Yeah, he is getting ready to graduate, but it should have happened sooner, or whatever. And so we just try to focus on it's huge growth for you that you have been patient with that process. And it's huge growth for you that you are able to articulate your frustration. And I feel like I'm sounding a little condescending or pedantic when I say that, but it's really true. Like, because if somebody is very bombastic, generally speaking, nobody's ever nice to them, and it's a chicken and egg. Are they bombastic because no one was nice to them, or is no one nice to them because they're bombastic? But even just to be able to say, I'm really glad you can articulate that frustration. That's different from how it was when I first met you. Even those little openings can be helpful, but it's really a matter of coming at it from an enlightened perspective of there's good here. I just have to find it, as opposed to, is there good here, or is this person just a lost cause and I don't like this conversation because now I'm on my heels, and why don't you just come get your kid if you hate the program so much? I will also say that that's pretty rare. I mean, most of our families are extremely grateful. They feel really supported. We do book study with them. We have calls with them every week. We do a lot of family therapy here. We do the parent workshops. We have a parent coach they can work with if they need to. So there's a lot of support. And I think, again, most of it boils down to that they're scared. They're just scared that their person is not going to make it. They're scared that they have failed in some way. That's another thing that we've seen more. We see it more now than we used to, is families identifying, perhaps over-identifying with their student. So like and I'm the same way, like I have to be disciplined around, if my son is not doing well, that doesn't mean that I'm not doing well. Or if my son, I mean, just as a quick allegory, our son was waitlisted to Harvard. So when I say my son just finished his first year at William and Mary and he loves it there and he's very happy, great. People respond positively to that. And people who know that school are very impressed. And people who know him are very happy that he's there because it's perfect for him. But when he was on the wait list to Harvard, of course, as his dad, I had a little ego kick. And if I really sat with it, which I did, and was really honest, like I didn't just want him to go to Harvard so he could have that education. My shadow is I want people to go, wow, he's at Harvard, right?
You must be a fantastic parent with your son going
Obviously.
to Harvard.
And when that didn't work out, that wasn't his path. And thank goodness, because I think he's much happier at William and Mary than he would have been. Rejection is protection, as they say.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it's been very humbling, having done this work for 26 years, to now be the parent of a young adult and see how I get stuck in all the same traps that our parents do, of wanting to over-identify with what is happening with him. And if he's going through a struggle, I understand, because of what I do for a living, this is good. He's developing grit. But as his dad, I just want him to not have to suffer, and I want to wrap him in bubble wrap and protect him from that. And I like saying he just finished his first year of school and now he's home, because it's like he succeeded and he wants to come home. So that might tell you, if you didn't know me, well, they managed to raise a child that can do a year of college and likes his parents enough that he wants to come home. But that's really beside the point, because it's not about me, it's about him. I did my job, which is to give him the support he needed to grow into an amazing adult. But I still trip constantly. And it's become a little bit of a trump card that I can actually say to the families, well, I'm the parent of a young adult too. My young adult is living away from me too. I understand. And it does tend to kind of put the pin in the grenade sometimes, when they just feel heard and they feel understood and they feel like you get it. The other additional thing that I'll often say as a validating statement is, if they don't know what differentiation is, I'll explain it. They say, differentiation is really hard no matter what. It's hard on the kid and it's hard on the parents. But your kid has given you ample reason to worry about them because they wouldn't be in treatment. So not only are you doing one of the hardest developmental tasks of parenthood, you're doing it with the additional burden of being scared for good reason. So it's hard for them to see the progress that we're seeing every day because they have trauma around whatever danger their kid was in. So it's really, I mean, this goes to another of our core values, which is compassion. Trying to have compassion for someone, even when they're being obnoxious or agitating you or questioning you, even when they're belligerent, just understanding it's coming from love for their kid and it's coming from fear. And so if you can address that and not take it personally, but also not just take it as abuse either, just say, well, let's address that, but then shift it, then all's well.
I have a kind of a follow-up question about let's not call it the current census, but the clients over the last 2-3 years.
Mhm.
What would you say have been the presenting problems, symptoms, challenges, diagnoses, and also medications?
Mhm.
And in addition to that, have they been trailing with a therapist or psychiatrist behind them already, or have a lot of kiddos been coming your way having never gone to therapy before, never working with a psychiatrist? So what does the last few years look like in terms of that presentation of
Yeah,
profile?
great question. Well, so we're working with the COVID kids now, right? So, and the COVID parents, I'll also add.
Yes.
And it's interesting being in Arizona because we were one of the least locked down states. And so there are other states that were not as locked down, like Florida. When you see kids from Florida and Arizona, there's a different vibe than
Mm,
kids who are from New York or from California or Oregon. And this is not meant as a political commentary whatsoever. It's just as a clinician, you observe that everyone went through scary stuff. Everyone went through the biggest fear that a human can have, which is fear of death, for yourself and your loved ones. As the brains were forming, there's an interesting question too, which is how old was that person when COVID was going on? But it's interesting because it seems like the longer and more intense the lockdown and the more anxiety exists within the family unit, the more traumatic that whole experience was for that person and their ability to get over certain humps and kind of get on with life has really been pretty severely impeded because of living in that kind of fear hotel for 2 years. you know
mhm.
if your pod was extremely tight and not super healthy, that's really hard developmentally for a lot of these young people. So I would say, again, I've been doing this for a long time, and we've now been doing Red Mountain for a long time too. When we first started Red Mountain 10 years ago, we were seeing a lot more acting out, and now we're seeing a lot more acting in.
Mhm.
There were it was a lot more like, well, in the beginning it was like herding cats because the cats are all running around and climbing trees and going in the bushes and scratching you and stuff like that. Now it's more getting the cats to get out of bed, like come gather. So it's still herding cats, but it's a very different vibe. Uh, Much more of a tendency to, I'm going to stay in bed all day as a coping strategy versus I'm going to go get drunk and wild and disappear with some person I don't know very well and be promiscuous. That still goes on, of course. I mean, we still see that. But it used to be, I would say, 80-20 acting out, and now it's 80-20 acting in. So there's a lot of coaxing and a lot of trying to understand why is it that it feels safer for you to isolate than to be out and about? Whereas it used to be more, why is it safer for you to be wild and reckless than to be calm and safe? So that's a big shift. And I would say that you mentioned earlier the fix my kid vibe of like, just fix it. I don't care about your woo-woo philosophies. That used to actually happen a lot more in the beginning. In the beginning, it was much more hot potato. He's your problem now. She's your problem now. And I don't really want to get super involved unless there's a huge problem. Now, and again, it's humbling to admit that I'm as guilty of this as any parent that we work with. The families tend to be closer. And that's not all bad. You know, there's a lot of positive to that. The families tend to be closer. I think that my generation, Gen X, a lot of us were latchkey kids. A lot of us had, and I love my parents, but, you know, there were some challenges and some deficits. And I think a lot of us kind of grew up wanting to be closer with our kids and wanting to really be demonstrative and make it really clear to them that we're there for them, but also kind of to a fault, you know. So unfortunate dynamic that is developed for a lot of the families is the person who's the identified patient or the IP becomes like the hub of the family.
Right.
And if they're not there because they're here, and or when the family's together, they're not incapacitated, the other members of the family kind of don't know what to do. So who am I and what is my role now? And there is also, I mean, I'm thinking unfortunately of one family we have right now where it's like that particular mom cannot tolerate the notion of her child doing better and being well, because so much identity is invested in being there and being the safety net. And again, for good reason. She's wired, her son would be dead if she hadn't done that for all these years, for sure. But it's hard now because it's almost like she's trying to pull him back into that dynamic because she's not comfortable in any other dynamic. She doesn't know anything else.
Sounds like a modern version of Munchausen's.
Yeah, totally. And if here's the other thing. First noble truth the Buddha taught is dukkha, which is usually translated as suffering, but that's really overly simplistic. It's suffering, discontent, malaise, not feeling like things are quite the way you want them to be. You know, my back hurts a little. You know, my wife has COVID. She's much more overtly suffering than I am. It's clear dukkha for her that she has COVID, but it's also dukkha for me that she has COVID because I don't get to hang out with my wife, whom I adore, and have fun with her, and I have to stay away so I don't get COVID, and I have to take care of our dogs. So there's always something. It could be really overt, or it could be more subtle, but to be human is to be discontent to some extent. And the problem that we see a lot is that the families think that they're discontent because their kid is a mess. And then when the kid is no longer a mess, they come to find that they're still discontent because they're human. But they don't know it's because they're human. They think it's because they're the parent of a troubled kid. And so there's kind of this, what do I do now? And we actually try to be very active in addressing that. You know, what is your identity if your young adult has launched successfully? And you mentioned they go back into that system, and they do, but hopefully just for holidays. Because the nice thing about working with young adults, or not necessarily a nice thing, but a factor in working with young adults is generally we're not trying to get them back home. We're trying to get them to create their own home away from the family. And so when I used to work with adolescents, it was in some ways simpler because the discharge plan was the same for everybody. You're going home. In some ways, it was more challenging though, because if the system was part of the problem and the system hadn't shifted enough, it was more about preparing the student to function in the dysfunction. Whereas in this situation, we're very cognizant that they're still going to have a relationship with their family, and we want to make sure they're spending a lot of time with their family, traveling with the family, going home to visit, things like that, so that if those triggers come up, they can work through it while they're here. But it's also very freeing that they get to kind of choose their own adventure after Red Mountain. And excuse me. And our job is to help them figure out what that adventure is going to be and how to execute it.
I want to switch gears because we have a little bit of time left. I'd really like to hear your thoughts on, and many parents are not aware of the machinery underneath of the hood, the way that maybe you and I are, in terms of a lot of big changes in our industry. Whether it's consolidation or programs closing or rebranding or outside investment coming in from private equity. And so this is a very hard pivot. So,
No problem.
but I'd love to hear your thoughts on like what you're seeing, what changes are happening right now, what changes you imagine coming around the corner, and if you want to use AI in any of this and explain how that could affect
Yeah.
things, that's fine too, because it seems everyone's talking about AI recently. But yeah, what kind of macro level changes are you seeing, and how could Red Mountain be impacted by this?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, for me, one of the most important factors of being a Zen student or being a mindfulness practitioner, being a Zen teacher, is to really train your mind to do what you want it to do.
Mm.
And one of the things that I've chosen to do is to train myself to be grateful and to look for the positives. So obviously, there's a lot of challenges to do the work that we do right now because the situations with COVID, the changes in the economy, various factors have affected it. We could spend a whole podcast on outdoor therapy and how that has changed and how that affects things. But I also think there's a lot of positives, and I don't think we're spending enough time talking about those. One of the positives, and this kind of ties into your previous question, is that most people are not afraid to admit that they're in therapy or that they've done therapy. It used to be very taboo. And it was kind of like, I don't know if I want to share that with someone that I just met. And now it seems like you meet someone and they just start telling you what they're working on in therapy. I think that COVID, one of the good things that came of COVID is that it actually increased a lot of people's anxiety and depression to the point that it was no longer tolerable and they needed to seek help. And another positive is that in this day and age, the way you and I are communicating right now, and the fact that people will see this when you and I are in different states, literally, is incredible. And so the fact that there are online options, access to therapy has gone way up because it's much less taboo and there's way more ways to access it. You don't have to drive to a therapist's office to get therapy. You can do it like this. So generally speaking, the students that we're seeing and the families are more savvy than they used to be. They generally know what their issues are. A lot of times the families are very cognizant of what their contribution is to their students' issues, and they're able to articulate it in a way they couldn't before. And it's really exciting for me in that respect, that it's not seen as bad to seek help. And even there's this movie out right now called The Fall Guy. And the central character, Ryan Gosling, when the movie opens, he has been taking a year off to deal with his mental and physical health. that being the central premise of a big tent movie 5 years ago, no way. There's no way. So it's becoming part of the culture to take care of ourselves and to not be in situations, relationships, work situations that are not good for us. And it's now when a family is saying, well, my young person decided to take a year off of school to address some trauma that was really hindering their enjoyment of life, and they're at this wonderful program in Sedona called Red Mountain. Now friends and family go, oh, that's so great, good for them, that's so wonderful. 10, 15 years ago, it would be, well, we don't really want to say what it is, right?
Still family secret.
Totally. And so I think that's all really, really awesome and really exciting and really wonderful. Another thing that we're seeing is we're seeing more students coming from home. We originally were designed to be a transition out of primary treatment, and we still are very good at that. But we're also seeing more young people who are, going back to that acting in versus acting out, and we would refer in layman's terms to them as more soft, soft. They're not dangerous. They're not necessarily in danger. They don't necessarily need to completely unplug for 90 days from their world in order to have a hard reset before they can come here. So we have very intentionally adapted and created different tracks depending on your needs and your diagnoses and your where you're coming from. Are you coming from home or not? How much therapy have you done in the past? Is this plug and play for you, or is it needing to teach you how to do this? And of course, it's stressful when things change and you have to adapt, but we are lucky to have a really amazing team that I keep talking about the core values, but another core value for us is growth, that we want our students to grow, but we also want to grow as a team and as a program and adapt. And so it's exciting for me as the leader to see ways without losing our core mission, which is to use the tools I mentioned earlier to help people achieve their goals and reach really where is appropriate for them to be developmentally. That's the core mission, but we have developed more ways to do it. And for me, it's actually an exciting time. And I know that most people are not feeling that way. But for me, it's an exciting time. It feels like there's a lot of possibility, and it feels like people are more open to the possibilities and more open to treatment. And I also think, frankly, that a positive thing that's come out of our profession being more scrutinized. The downside, obviously, is that some really excellent programs have closed, and that's not good because that, again, limits access. I was talking earlier about access. So for me, the more people have access, the more people are going to get better. But there's also been some programs and some practices that have been eliminated as they rightly should have been. And that, I think, once we get through this challenging time of being scrutinized, I think that the culture will be that we responded well to those challenges and that those programs that are still around are really high quality and really student centric, client centric, not abusing in any way, not coercing in any way, offering resources, and adaptable and willing to change based on feedback from the participants. So again, I'm not trying to sugarcoat that COVID was a national and a global trauma, and I'm not trying to sugarcoat that it's a hard time to do the work we do. But I think that there are lots of positives and there's lots of, it's kind of up to us, right? What comes out of it? Like, do we want it to make us better? Or do we want to feel beaten down and defeated? That's really up to us. That's up to us to decide.
I like that. Final pivot away from industry. And I would love to hear, I get questions a lot from parents as well as clients about book recommendations and podcasts and just people, influencers that are out there. What are you reading? What are you listening to? What books have come up on your radar? What are some influential people that are out there, whether in industry or in another industry that are kind of taking up space with you right now that you're really enjoying or you think are really helpful?
Yeah, that's a great question too. Well, there are certainly things out there that are not necessarily directly related to the work that are helpful for families. Again, another positive thing is that if you want to learn more about mindfulness, it's really easy nowadays. I mean, most Zen teachers have a podcast. So,
Right.
one of the things that we do with our families that are interested in it and really want to maximize the bang for their buck and really want to support their students is learn about mindfulness, start a meditation practice, download the Calm app, like set yourself up to be in the same process that your student is in. So that is big picture, certainly something that I really recommend. It might be a little on the nose to say so, but your podcast, I think, is a great
Oh,
resource for families.
shucks.
It's true. It's true. And it's exciting for me that so many of us are out there and sharing our expertise and sharing what we know. And it's interesting. We have a YouTube channel, and all of our videos are linked on our website. So sometimes you get a family touring or visiting for the first time, and they meet us and they have no idea who we are, and we have to kind of explain it. And other times you get, oh my gosh, I've watched all your videos. There's like 70 videos on there. I can't believe I'm really meeting you in person, and that's always kind of fun. Because it tells you that it was helpful and impactful in some way and might have influenced the decision to come here and also might have been a support. I also really can't say enough about The Journey of the Heroic Parent, which I'm sure you're familiar with, which
Mhm.
is Brad Reedy's book. And Brad is someone that most of us that have been in this field for a while know personally. He certainly is a pioneer. And I remember when his book came out, uh, being at a conference where he gave the keynote, and people were kind of scratching their head over the title, like, what are you talking about? Like, the parents are hard to deal with. We have to tolerate the parents. They're not heroic. The kids are heroic. And they're not saying, no one says that anymore. He has managed to more or less single-handedly shift our whole field's perception of the parents and the families and what they're going through. And that book is very powerful because it helps the parents to understand I am too on a journey. I'm not just the audience from my kid's journey. I'm not just the one wringing their hands or the one that's getting called in the middle of the night and getting my adrenaline shot to, go deal with the next crisis. I'm actually on a journey. We as a family are on a journey, and it is a heroic journey, and it is a transformative journey if you embrace it as such. Unsurprisingly, there are families who participate in our book study of that book, and there are families who don't. There's families who still have fix my kid syndrome. They don't want to think of it as a journey. And if it is a journey, they're certainly not on it, But those who can really look at it that way, definitely they benefit a lot and their student benefits a lot. So anything that supports the family in their journey and in being able to, this is kind of difficult to put into words, but both be fully present for their student's journey and give them the space to be on the journey. That's really hard balance to find. But when
Right.
the family can find that balance, the kid generally thrives because they feel seen and loved and accepted and supported, but they also don't feel that they're being held down or held back or over scrutinized or mom and dad are living in the past or whatever. or dad and dad, or mom and mom, or grandma, or whoever's the parent, the parent is also evolving and changing. There's that impermanence theme again. Doing impermanence in an intentional way. And this is a little bit tangential and off your question, but it's worth mentioning too. Something we really try to educate our families on, and it's very helpful if you can actually put it up as a graphic on a whiteboard or on a computer screen, is that if you're 50 years old, then 1 year is 2% of your life, right? But if you are 20 years old, right, it's a much bigger portion of your life. So where that's helpful is I wish I had $1 for every time there's been a family and a student at odds, usually toward the end of the program, where the family's fretting over the student leaving and the student is feeling confident and comfortable with their plan. And the student will go, I've been sober for a year, or they'll go, I haven't been retreating to my bed for a year or whatever. And the family will go, well, she's only been sober a year. He's only been out of his bed for a year. And that's totally legit, because to the family, it's not very long. And to the student, it's a really long time.
Yeah.
And so anything that gives that perspective and helps the family understand that a year is an objective measure of time that is the same for everyone as far as how many days it is, but it's a very different measure of time subjectively.
Right.
So just anything we can do to help the parents understand, or any media that can help them understand the process, is super helpful.
Josh, I appreciate your time so much. I love talking with you, as always. What is the best way to have a parent find out more about you, find out more about Red Mountain? What's the best way for folks to get in touch with you?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So redmountainsedona.com is the easiest way. There's a 5-minute video right on the landing page that really tells the whole story and tells you a lot about the program. There's also a lot of deep dives you can do on the website into all the different things we do and why. I mentioned the YouTube channel, which is Mindful Moments. That is, you can find that on YouTube, or a link to the videos on the website. info@redmountainsedona.com. We've had a lot of Josh's work here over 10 years. It's a very common name for my generation, but I'm the first one. So mine is just Josh at redmountainsedona.com. The direct line to our admissions director is 775-293-0751, 775-293-0751. So yeah, we'd be happy to answer any questions you might have, and here to help.
Great. I will post all of that in the show notes, including book recommendations and some of the other content that we talked about. So, Josh, thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Before you head off, I just wanted to say thanks for tuning in today. All of the resources discussed are in the show notes below. And one last thing, if you know anyone that would benefit from this episode, please forward it along to them. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe to my podcast, the YouTube channel, and the newsletter. It lets me know someone out there is listening. All right, see you all next time.